In the village of Lulu, tradition was everything. The elders believed in old customs passed down through generations. One of the most important customs was the choice of a bride. The men of the village would go through a sacred ceremony to find a wife. It was believed that the spirits of the ancestors chose the right woman for each man. For Juma, the strongest warrior in the village, this was a moment of pride. He had fought many battles and earned respect from everyone. But nothing could have prepared him for the day the elders chose Zara. Zara was a beautiful woman, but she carried with her a dark rumor. It was said that anyone who married her would face terrible misfortune. Some believed she was cursed, while others whispered that she was a victim of betrayal by the gods. Juma listened to the warnings, but he trusted the elders' judgment. They said it was his fate to marry Zara. Juma wasn't afraid of curses. He believed that his strength could overcome any obstacle. So, despite the fear in the villagers' eyes, he accepted his destiny. The night after the engagement, strange things began to happen in the village. Juma had trouble sleeping. His mind raced with questions. Could the curse really be true? As he lay in bed, he heard whispers outside his window. Voices echoed through the village, warning him to break off the marriage before it was too late. Some villagers even claimed they saw shadows moving around the village, dark and quick like a storm cloud. Juma brushed these thoughts away. He was a warrior, and warriors didn't fear shadows. The next morning, Juma went to the village elders to discuss the strange happenings. But when he arrived at the meeting place, they were silent. They only looked at him with pity in their eyes. "You have been chosen, Juma," one elder said slowly. "The curse is real, but your strength will guide you through it." Juma wanted to believe them, but deep down, a feeling of dread began to grow. Was he strong enough to protect his people from what was coming? The first sign of trouble came a week after Juma and Zara's engagement. The village crops began to wither. The plants that usually thrived in the rich soil of Igbo now stood dry and lifeless. The villagers couldn't understand what was happening. Some blamed the gods, while others whispered that it was Zara's curse at work. Juma tried to remain calm. He spoke to the farmers and promised that the village would find a way to fix the problem. But as the days passed, the land only grew colder and more barren. The villagers began to avoid Zara, casting suspicious glances in her direction whenever she walked by. Juma noticed the change in how people treated her, but he still stood by her side. He knew that love and loyalty were stronger than any curse. However, his trust began to waver when another disaster struck. The villagers' cattle began to fall ill. One by one, they grew weak, and the animals died in their pens. The once thriving village was slowly sinking into despair. Juma couldn't ignore the signs any longer. His people were suffering, and the blame was falling on Zara. Some of the villagers began to openly speak out, asking Juma to reconsider the marriage. "She's cursed, Juma," they would say. "Look at the crops. Look at the animals. You must break the engagement before it's too late." Juma knew that the village was losing faith in him and Zara. The once joyful sounds of the village were now replaced by whispers of fear. He began to question himself. Was he making a mistake by marrying Zara? Was he bringing doom upon the village? Before we continue the story, kindly hit the subscribe button and turn on the notifications bell. It gives us the courage to continue bringing more amazing stories. But Zara seemed to love him, and he couldn't bear the thought of turning away from her. Every time he looked into her eyes, he saw kindness and warmth. Despite the troubles around them, she remained calm and supportive. She never spoke of the curse, only of their future together. But the fear in the village was growing. Every day, more people came to Juma with warnings. The elders remained silent, their faces hard and unreadable. Juma's heart was heavy with doubt. As the wedding day drew closer, the village seemed to sink further into despair. More cattle died, and the crops showed no signs of recovery. The people's faces were filled with worry, and the village was quieter than ever. Yet, Zara remained hopeful. She continued to prepare for the wedding, but even she could feel the tension in the air. Juma, on the other hand, began to feel the weight of the curse pressing down on him. His heart was torn. He loved Zara, but the village's fear was like a heavy stone on his chest. Juma's father, a respected elder in the village, called him aside one evening. Juma, you are a warrior, but love is not enough to protect the village, his father warned. You must decide. Will you marry Zara and risk the village's future, or will you break this bond to save your people? The words stung Juma's heart, but he knew they were true. He couldn't deny the damage that was happening around him. Yet, in his heart, he still believed that Zara wasn't to blame. He couldn't bring himself to betray her. The day of the wedding finally arrived. The village was a mix of excitement and fear. Juma stood at the altar, surrounded by villagers who watched in silence. Zara, dressed in a beautiful gown, walked towards him. Her face was calm, but her eyes showed the sadness that lay beneath. As she reached Juma's side, he took her hand. For a moment, everything seemed perfect. But as they exchanged vows, the ground beneath their feet began to shake. The air grew heavy with an eerie chill, and a loud crack sounded from the nearby forest. The villagers gasped, and some ran for cover. The ceremony was interrupted by a loud, terrifying roar from the forest. It was unlike anything they had ever heard before. Juma stood firm, but his heart raced. He knew that the curse had not only begun to affect the village, it had come to life. The villagers screamed in terror as the sky darkened, and Juma could hear whispers of ancient spirits. Was it too late to break the curse? Had he made the wrong choice? The village was in chaos. The ground trembled, and the air was thick with fear. Juma rushed to the elders, hoping for answers, but they were as shaken as the rest of the village. The curse is powerful, Juma, one elder said with a trembling voice. It was not meant to be broken. Only a sacrifice can end it. Juma felt his heart drop. A sacrifice? The thought of losing Zara was unbearable, but he knew that if this curse was to be broken, it might cost him everything. What do I have to do? Juma asked, his voice filled with desperation. The elder looked him in the eyes. You must face the ancient spirits in the forest. Only by offering a true sacrifice will the curse be lifted. Juma's heart pounded in his chest. He didn't know if he was ready for what lay ahead, but he had to try. For Zara, for the village, and for his own peace of mind. He turned to Zara, who was standing nearby, her face pale and filled with worry. I will do what it takes, Juma promised her. Zara nodded, but said nothing. She had her own fears, but she trusted Juma's strength. Juma, armed with only a spear and his courage, ventured into the dark forest. The trees seemed to close in on him, and an eerie silence surrounded him. He could feel the presence of something watching him. The spirits of the forest were restless, and Juma knew that he was being tested. Every step he took seemed to echo in the stillness, and soon he began to hear faint whispers calling his name. He ignored them, knowing that the spirits were trying to confuse him. Hours passed as Juma walked deeper into the forest, the air growing colder with each step. He finally reached a clearing where a large stone altar stood. At the base of the altar were symbols carved into the ground, glowing faintly. Juma knelt before the altar, his heart heavy with the weight of his decision. This was where the curse would either end or consume him. He whispered a prayer to the spirits, asking for their forgiveness. As he stood up, he felt a cold wind rush past him. The spirits were ready to test him. Suddenly, the ground shook beneath Juma's feet. A figure appeared before him, cloaked in shadows. It was the spirit of the forest, a powerful being that had guarded the village for centuries. The spirit spoke in a voice that was both terrifying and beautiful. You have come to break the curse, it said. But are you truly worthy? Juma stood tall and nodded. I will do whatever it takes to save my people and my bride. The spirit laughed, a sound that echoed through the forest. You think you can lift the curse with your strength alone? To break the curse, you must face your greatest fear and make a sacrifice. Juma swallowed hard. His greatest fear was losing Zara, but he knew that this was the only way. The spirit raised a hand, and the ground split open, revealing a dark pit. You must choose, Juma, your love or your people. Juma stood at the edge of the pit, looking down into the darkness below. He could feel the weight of the decision pressing on him. The spirit had given him a choice, either sacrifice Zara or the entire village. His heart ached at the thought of losing her, but the villagers depended on him. He closed his eyes, thinking of all the people who had supported him throughout his life. They had trusted him to make the right choice. He turned to Zara, who stood behind him, her eyes filled with understanding. I love you, Zara, Juma said softly. But I must choose my people. Zara stepped forward, her face calm but filled with sadness. I understand, Juma, she whispered. You are a warrior, and you must do what is best for the village. With a heavy heart, Juma stepped forward and dropped a piece of his armor into the pit. The ground trembled as the spirit's laughter filled the air. The curse was broken, but at a great cost. The ground stopped shaking and the air cleared. The spirit disappeared into the shadows, leaving Juma standing alone. Zara came to his side, and for a moment, they simply stood there in silence. The curse was lifted, but Juma could feel the weight of the sacrifice in his chest. He had chosen his people over the woman he loved. The village would survive, but Zara had lost him. The pain in her eyes cut deeper than any sword. I did it for the village, Juma said, his voice thick with emotion. Zara nodded but didn't speak. She had accepted his decision, but it didn't make the pain any less. They returned to the village, where the crops were beginning to bloom once more. The people celebrated, but Juma couldn't shake the feeling that he had lost something more precious than he could ever regain. He had saved the village, but at the cost of his happiness. The village slowly returned to normal. The crops grew tall again and the cattle were healthy. Juma became a hero, the one who had saved his people from the curse. But despite the celebrations, Juma couldn't forget the sacrifice he had made. Zara had vanished from the village after the curse was broken. No one knew where she had gone. Some believed she had returned to her family, while others thought she had left to heal her broken heart. Juma searched for her, but she was nowhere to be found. Years passed, and the village prospered once more. Juma became a respected elder, but his heart always carried the weight of the sacrifice he had made. He had saved his people, but he had lost the love of his life. He often wondered if he had made the right choice. Would he ever see Zara again? Would she ever forgive him for the pain he had caused her? Years later, as Juma sat under the shade of an old tree, he saw a familiar face approaching. It was Zara. She was older, but her beauty remained unchanged. She walked up to him slowly, and Juma's heart skipped a beat. Zara, he whispered, you came back. Zara smiled softly. I never left, Juma. I was always here, waiting for you. The two stood in silence for a moment, neither knowing what to say. The years of separation had created a distance between them, but the bond they shared was still there. I'm sorry, Zara, Juma said, his voice filled with regret. I should have chosen you. Zara shook her head. You chose your people, Juma, and I respect that, but I never stopped loving you. Tears filled Juma's eyes. After all the years of pain and regret, he finally realized that love and duty could exist together. It had taken a long time, but he had learned that some sacrifices were too great to make alone. Zara and Juma spent the next few days talking about everything that had happened. The pain of the past was still fresh, but they both knew that forgiveness was the key to healing. Juma had saved the village, but he had also hurt the woman he loved. Zara had never blamed him. Instead, she had spent the years learning to forgive herself and him. Together, they built a new life in the village, where they worked side by side to ensure that no one would ever face such a difficult choice again. Their love grew stronger with each passing day. The village flourished, and the people learned the true meaning of sacrifice, love, and forgiveness. Juma and Zara had both made mistakes, but they had come to understand that true strength lies in the ability to forgive. They had both paid a heavy price, but in the end, they found peace and happiness in each other's arms. Juma and Zara lived the rest of their days in the village, raising a family and ensuring that the lessons of the past were passed down to the next generation. The curse was broken, but it had left its mark on the village. People learned that love and destiny are not always in our control, but we must choose the path that is right for us. Juma and Zara became symbols of forgiveness and strength, teaching everyone that sometimes the greatest sacrifice is the one we make for those we love, and in the end, peace was restored.